All right. Welcome, everybody. If you're watching our replay, we are here today with Connor Rague from Brown and Brown Insurance. We're going to talk about business insurance today. Very exciting stuff.
Woohoo.
I just
Yes.
admitted to Connor that I'm like a super dummy when it comes to insurance. So I need people like him in my life. Actually, I'll just give you a shout out. We had an amazing experience working with you guys last year to look at all of our policies. I knew that we were underinsured, but this was an area that I think that I was like avoiding because I didn't know what I didn't know, right? So,
I was wondering if you were going to give me that shout out. I
yeah,
appreciate that.
yeah,
Yes.
it
So
was
you've been through the process, so you know it can be easy. It's not always easy, but
It was
it's
definitely
useful.
easy. I know that
Useful
you put
exercise.
it may not have felt easy to you because I'm sure you put a ton of work in the back end to get us where we needed to be. But to me, as the business owner, it felt easy, and I really felt reassured that like we were going from a place that I was like having anxiety because I knew that we were underinsured, but I didn't know where to start the process or what was missing, to a place where I felt like somebody really knowledgeable had worked through it and explained to me like what we needed and why we needed it. And it really was easy. So I appreciate you.
Yeah,
But
not I was gonna say, well, not to just go back and forth saying how great we both were in that experience, but you came to me and said, I want more insurance, which is really not exactly the conversation that I typically have with
right.
business owners, small business owners. It's typically like, all right, how do I cut costs? So
Yeah.
um,
So
yeah,
we'll
so
talk
I
we can talk
appreciate that.
about both. We can talk about both of those. How do you find the right insurance at the right price, but to actually make sure that you have that you coverage you need? But before we
Yeah.
do any of that, introduce yourself to everybody. So tell us a little
Okay,
bit more about who Connor is
sure.
and what it is that you do.
Sure. So thanks for having me first. I appreciate that,
Yeah.
Christine. So Connor Rague, I work at Brown and Brown Insurance, fifth or sixth largest insurance broker in the world, but we definitely have a good hold on the local markets too. So I work in Maine. I'm from Old Orchard Beach, lived there almost my whole life, and I work out of a uh, Falmouth office.
Nice.
Um, Brown and Brown's new to Maine. So we are trying to get our name out there. Maine is very tight knit community, and
Mm,
even names that are not recognizable, it takes a little bit to kind of get going. So I've been tasked to kind of get our name out there a little bit more, and doing things like this is important to just kind of let people know what we do and how we might be different than some of the other agents that are out there. So yeah, other than that, I'm a pretty musical person. I love music. I love being outside, things of that nature. Being in nature in Maine is pretty easy. So that's what I like to do outside of doing insurance.
I
So
was gonna say you're in the perfect spot if that's what your jam on the weekend is. So nice.
mhm,
Well,
best
Maine's lucky
wish.
to have you. You know that I go way back with one of your colleagues, so I've been familiar with Brown and Brown for a long time, and I just think that you guys do an amazing job. And I'm excited to talk about why the experience with you is different because, just like anything else, not everything's created equal. Your experience with one vendor in a particular industry is not necessarily going to be the same as your experience with another vendor in a particular area. And my experience of working with anybody in the Brown and Brown space is that you are always dealing with someone that's really, really knowledgeable. And I think that's a lot of what business owners need, right? Because, like I just said, I don't know what I don't know. I'm relying on you to try to give
Mhm.
me the best possible direction. So let's kind of start there. Let's talk about some of the things that business owners don't know that they don't know. Like you just said, a lot of people are coming to you just saying, like, I need to cut costs. How do I make my insurance cheaper? Which isn't always necessarily the best place to start. I mean, it's possible
No,
that you're
no, we don't,
overpaying.
we don't love hearing that, but
No,
we do hear it
it's
a
always
lot.
possible you're overpaying for your coverage, but I would venture a guess that more often than not, business owners are actually not covered for a lot of the things that they think that they're covered for, or maybe over covered for things that don't make sense for their business. So, what are some of like the most common issues and pitfalls that you see when you start talking to a business owner about their insurance coverage?
I think you kind of nailed it in terms of, all right, well, what are you paying for and what are you actually getting? And it's
Yeah.
getting the clients or the prospects to think of buying insurance in a different way. And when you really try to set it up where the cost of really insuring your whole business and
Mm-hmm.
all those gaps, we try to get in there and see what people have currently and where there might be some blind spots. Set them up to know what they're buying first, to
Yeah.
understand what the cost is and why it might be so much money, because some of the coverages that we might even go over today, they can be expensive, but the losses are just absolutely out of control.
Yeah.
And that's what you're trying to defend against, because you can buy all the insurance you want, but if something's not covered, then you're insuring yourself on that, and it's way more volatile to leave yourself open to those sorts of losses. So that's what we first try to just look at things that aren't covered, and try to at least give them an option as to where you could cover that. So
So what
uh,
are some of the most common gaps that you see? Like when a business owner comes to you and says, "Let's just start by looking at what I'm covered for and what I'm not." What are some of the most common areas that you see them being
so
traditionally underinsured?
the big one is cyber. It's cyber insurance, and the thing that is confusing folks, which I'm seeing now, is that some of the carriers are starting to throw in a little bit of cyber coverage. So
Yeah.
they say, "Oh, well, I have cyber," and I say, "Okay, well, send me over your cyber policy." And they say, "No, it's like a part of the package," which again might be giving people a false sense of security. But usually when carriers, I say when they add those coverages kind of as a little extra, it's a way for you to know that you don't have enough of that. When they just say like, oh, hey, we're going to throw in $100,000 of
Yeah.
cyber, you think you might be getting cyber coverage, but really, if it's not a standalone cyber policy, that's a big one here. It should be a standalone cyber policy. Then you're severely underinsured when it comes to cyber. So that is the first big one I would say is if you accept any sort of money, if you accept any sort of transaction, credit cards, e-pay, anything like that, that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you take any money, then you probably need to have some sort of cyber coverage. So that's an easy lead in for
I
a
was
lot of
gonna
people.
ask that because I mean, we're a remote business that obviously deals with people's personal information. So I was well aware of the fact that we needed cyber coverage. And I
Mhm.
was exactly that business where what we had was sort of an add-on to our professional liability policy. And there was just always this sort of nagging feeling to me of like, it's not enough, right? Like it's and I hear stories about businesses that literally go bankrupt for dealing with some type of cyber data breach because the cost, like you said, is astronomical. It far exceeds the cost of the premiums on a policy that would have protected me. Um, but for businesses that like maybe traditionally wouldn't have thought about cyber, I think that your point that you just made is so important. Like think about the mechanic. I don't think that cyber is necessarily the auto mechanic's first concern, but what has happened over the last decades is now that person is taking someone's credit card payment, whereas it might have been checks or cash 20 years ago. And now you're collecting all of this credit card information, and you don't necessarily know whether or not your credit card processor is secure. Or if they're
Mhm.
offering any type of guarantee of security or
Mhm.
coverage or what have you, or if you're going to be liable at that point of sale.
Yeah, it's changed, right? Like, and where I think the biggest change is now it's not just happening to the big guys. So
Yeah,
the media is good at reporting these large cyber attacks. I can remember, Target. I could think of
right.
I don't know if it was Microsoft or someone, all the planes had to be landed. Like you hear about those cyber attacks, but really what cyber attacks are on the rise are the low hanging fruit. These mom and pops, these smaller businesses, or call it 50 employees and under. Hackers are now starting to go after them as oh, that's an easy target. So I
Yeah.
think it's starting to trickle into the smaller businesses, and it's not reported as such. People know of the big ones, but it's really starting to happen. So we were on a Zoom yesterday with a gentleman from Harbor Networks. His name's Tim Birchman. And he was saying that the largest increase in cyber attacks is for companies with 50 and under employees,
Yeah.
because
Because
it's easier.
they have the least security.
They
Yeah,
have
and
the least amount of security. Yeah.
I'm sure that, being in that space, you see this. I know Tim has talked about this before too, but especially with AI now, like the
Mhm.
cyber attacks have gotten so much more sophisticated. It's a lot easier, if
Mhm.
you're not paying attention to be kind of duped by things like as simple as the email or the text message or the link or whatever, because it looks so real.
Yeah.
Um, even a few years ago, you could kind of tell a fake in some more easier ways, but now I mean, the email address seems real, like everything seems real. So it is a lot scarier. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, you tell me, but I think that this is something that a lot of those like add-on cybers don't cover, and some of the standalone cybers might cover. So I think when we think about cybersecurity, like we're just protecting against the outside risk. Like there's some type of data breach with information that I have, and I don't want to get sued by my customers for that data breach. But there's also this loss of business, right? Like if I'm dealing with a cyber attack, I might not have access to my whole team might not have access to their computers and our clients' data for days or a
Yes.
week. So,
Yes.
is that an area that you're looking at too?
Depending on the cyber coverage, yeah. So
Yeah.
there could be some coverage that's built into what's called business interruption. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, if this is an interruption to your business, and you have to shut down for a little bit, or you have to just kind of completely focus on the cyber attack, absolutely. But that's not, again, unless you have a really robust cyber policy, which has to be a standalone policy. I'll say it again, standalone policy for cyber.
Yeah.
There's a chance that none of that would be covered. But I think the best example, at least where a cyber attack gets out of control, where you don't even think, you just think of maybe the lost money that people have lost from the cyber
Sure.
attack. But so there was a gentleman who ran a payment processing, just him, and he had something like 10,000 clients because super quick transactional business. He had a cyber attack, and he had to notify 10,000 people. So you have to, and it has to be like paid, or it has to be notified through, official mail. So just the postage alone on
10,000. Yeah.
10,000 pieces of mail. I don't know how much a stamp is now, maybe $2, $1.50. Like it's probably something, a buck at least, there's 10
Yeah.
grand right there before you even start to do any, due process, just a notification portion of that. And I'm
Yeah.
guessing most business owners don't have
10
10
grand
to
to
20,
send out
10 to 20
envelopes.
grand of burning a hole in their pocket to send out envelopes just as the first start of a cyber attack. I think it's just a good way for me to at least say, it's not an expensive coverage, but it can be based on your exposure. But I just quoted something for a client. He made sales is like 2 or 3 million, and it was, $1,000, $1,300.
That's
It's
well worth it to protect $2 to $3 million a year worth of revenue.
yes, and you get about, again, depending on which levels you choose for coverage, you get at least $1 million in coverage, $1 million to $2 million in coverage. So just to go off of that just a little bit, again, what it covers are things like data theft, damage to digital assets, fund theft, legal fees, notification costs, payments to
Mm.
third party claimants, cyber forensic support. I mean, if someone doesn't have cyber and they get cyber attacked, I have no idea where I would turn first if I did not have cyber insurance. It's
Yeah.
it's the first line of defense
Yeah,
if something.
100%. And I mean, I think that we are a bit of an anomaly, like I said, because I had the recognition that we're a remote business. And so this is something that's really, really important. But really, you're right. It's important to, if you're getting paid by somebody, this is an important thing for you to look at. Um, what other types of holes do you typically see? Where do you other typically see other,
Mhm.
coverage gaps of business owners? Just, I'm assuming a lot of people have like a professional liability policy or some type of general liability policy, and then they have no idea the number of exclusions that is going to address,
Yes.
like not address.
Yeah, so typically it's like you get call it a business owner's policy for a small to mid-sized business. And the other thing that we see a lot of is called a line of coverage called employee practices liability,
Mm.
EPLI.
Let's
Okay, and
talk
that's the
about that. Let's talk about our
sure.
employee practices coverage.
Sure. So there's multiple, layers to this coverage, which again makes it, once you start to kind of talk through the scenarios of things that could happen
Mm,
in this coverage. So employee practices liability, it's things like wrongful termination. It's things like
mm,
harassment, breach of contract, emotional distress. So you're a business owner and you lay someone off or you fire someone and they come back and start crying foul, whether it's foul or not, they can sue you. So
Right.
that cover employee practices liability will cover you for those types of losses, which in certain verticals, certain businesses is probably a little bit more prevalent,
Yeah.
businesses with more turnover and things of that nature. I think of, you know, seasonal businesses or
Sure.
restaurants,
Restaurants. Yeah.
things like that. So there's that kind of first party, but then there's another coverage in EPLI where, let's say, your employees are accused of harassing or, what's I guess, like being prejudiced towards someone
Sure.
or someone's feeling like they've been wronged by an employee. You don't have coverage for that either. So I'm
Yeah.
just thinking of some I live in Old Orchard, so a fairly seasonal town. Hotels are huge for this, where unruly guests, they start kind of maybe popping off on TripAdvisor saying, oh, they were prejudiced against me because I'm so and so, and they kicked me out. It covers you for that too. So stuff
Okay.
that's really not in your control, and it's yes, you'd like to trust your employees to be nice and courteous and respectful and whatnot,
Sure.
but things do happen, and people can again just throw those allegations, whether it's
Right.
whether it's substantiated or not. You want coverage for that because there's defense costs that will be in that coverage too. So they'll defend you
Yeah.
even if it's not substantiated. So it's kind of a harassment, wrongful termination sort of coverage that we do not see. That coverage, depending on what your business is, could be expensive. But if your employees are a huge part of your business, which depending on what your business is, they
Yeah.
will be, um, you kind of want to have that sort of coverage because that's a scary coverage too, where you could think that things are going well and you have to let someone go, but then they come back on you and say, oh well, hey, I was targeted for this, that, and the other thing. So
Well,
that's
and to
a
your point is that even if they're unsubstantiated claims, because it does happen, right? Like where
yes.
somebody has just decided that this is how they're going to handle the situation. They're now saying untruths about things that did or didn't happen.
Mhm.
Even if they're unsubstantiated, you are still going to have some legal costs to address that. Like
Sure.
they're going to find some attorney that's willing to take this case for them.
Mhm.
And now you're forced to be spending money and time, and it's really disruptive to your business culture.
Mhm.
Again, even if it's not true, to be dealing with something like that. So having to not have the stress of like, where are you getting the money for this? I think is really, really critical. Now, I mean, I guess when business owners come to you, because this is something that I didn't think about, honestly, and like we don't have a ton of employees, but it really only takes one to,
Mhm.
have potentially have an issue.
Right.
um how often do you see businesses come to you where they already have this coverage? Not often, I assume.
I wouldn't say all that often,
Yeah.
but depending on the size, I feel
Right.
like once you get up in size, that's when people start to kind of realize, all right, well, I have a bigger loss here if things happen.
Yeah.
But it's something that we can talk about, I'd say at least half of the time, where um, they might know a little bit about it, but don't even know if they have it and probably do not have it.
Yeah.
So it's a coverage that we've been able to, I guess, educate more people on, which is a lot of what we like to do, educate, and then just let them make an informed decision because we're not going to tell you what to buy.
Sure.
That's not how we do it. We lay everything out and let you make an informed decision. But one more kind of last point on how granular that EPLI coverage can get. So there was a gentleman that was running a scam where he was going onto websites of local hotels and lodging, and if they did not have, if their website was not set up as like ADA compliant or being able to be read by a blind person, or they would send a letter and saying, hey, your your website is not navigable for me. I have, you know, I'm blind. So give me $10,000 or I'll sue you. That is
Stop it.
that's an employee practices thing too. So it gets super granular in terms of some of these claims. Again, that's a form of harassment or um, uh, you know, prejudice against a blind person that can't go on your website. So there's there's people, especially in America, it's super highly litigious. People are going to find
Yeah.
issues, and especially going to find issues with the people that aren't as protected or don't know that they aren't protected. So
Yeah, for
it's scary.
sure. And I just want to say really quickly, because like we get a lot of questions from people around like legal structure when they're forming their business, and they'll say things like, you know, isn't my LLC or my corporation supposed to protect me? And it's like, it might protect you personally. It might, depending on, you know, how it's formed and what your lawyer did at the formation process
Mhm.
and how well your documents are aligned and things like that. But it's not going to protect the business itself. And to me, I guess, as a small business owner, like my husband and I are self-employed in our own business, right? So this is our whole livelihood. And to your earlier point with some of these examples, like if we had to send out $10,000 worth of postage, like it wouldn't bankrupt us, but it would be a very, very uncomfortable expense. And that's only one expense to address an issue. Never
Yes.
mind like legal, never mind being potentially sued by somebody, like never mind the rest of it. And so I'm just not willing to put our entire livelihood on the line when a policy for couple $1,000 a year could give me the peace of mind that if something were to happen, we have a place to go.
Yeah.
One of the other things that you and I talked about when we looked at our coverage that I didn't necessarily think about, and I think that this is more prevalent too, is like physical business property. Because
Mhm.
it, you know, 10 years ago, we all went to our office from 9 to 5, right? And our
Mhm.
physical business property didn't leave the office. You just went to work and then you went home.
Yeah.
Now, everybody works remotely,
Mhm.
or you have some hybrid model and you're taking laptops back and forth, and maybe you have a
Mhm.
company cell phone. Like all these things are moving physically that
Mhm.
weren't moving 10 years ago. And that was coverage that I didn't think about. So can you talk a little bit about that too? Because I assume that you see a gap there a lot of times as well.
Yeah, it's like where are your people and what do they have? I
Yeah.
guess is
And nobody has a list to actually answer that question.
no, and this is a coverage that is not expensive either.
Yeah,
That's the thing is like, you know, when you're looking at coverages, you want to see what you're paying for versus what you get. You talk about the cyber that we just talked about. $1,000 for $1 million in coverage is like that's nothing. Like, yes, you
right.
want to pay that 1,000 to get a million. So in business personal property, you know, if you raise your rate by, you know, or your coverage to 30,000 from even 10,000, it'd be maybe $20, $30, $40. So
So worth it.
it's and it's super worth it. And it's something that, you know, if people are in different spots and with your property, you know, the underwriters will be asking where they are. I think when we went through it, like they asked, you know, where they are
Yep.
and that, what do they have for equipment, you know, what kind of break it down. But I think business personal property, if you're a property driven business in terms of like what your employees are using and you have a lot of like tech, it's not expensive to raise rates. Sorry, raise coverages
Yeah.
for that particular coverage. So
Which
yeah,
there's so many more businesses that need that now than there were 10 years ago, like I said, because so many more people are working in a remote or a hybrid environment where, like, I remember my first job out of college, like, we didn't have laptops that we brought home with us.
mm,
And this came up with you and I in conversation because in the middle of you quoting our coverage, we had an employee at the time who was living in Florida, and she ended up smack dab in the middle of one of the nasty hurricanes that hit Florida. And like, thank God she was okay. That obviously was my first concern, but that was what, you know, kind of went off in my brain to go, I don't think that we're covered for the loss of her laptop. Like, if something happens to her home, and like, obviously, I don't expect her to be concerned about her work laptop as a primary,
yeah,
you know, but I don't think that I have coverage for that because it's not physically in the office space that I call like our corporate headquarters. And that was kind
right.
of what made me go, oh. I
Yes.
didn't know that I needed this.
Yes, working remote is different than working in an office, and it's harder to track down those sorts of things. But yeah, when
Yeah,
you think of it, it's like, all right, what does my person in Texas have? What does my person in, the Czech Republic have? There can be a thought where, all right, who has what and how
yeah.
much how
How much
much
is
is
it?
it?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So that's like just a tip of the iceberg of what we talked about. But again, that's something if you don't know, then you wouldn't know what to ask or why it would be important. But
Right.
that's another kind of little again with certain coverages, you can raise that coverage and really not be charged for too much. And that's the thing that we like to bring to where it's like
Yeah.
you can make changes to your program that will really strengthen your I guess resiliency of your policy with minimal effort or price. So,
That was my favorite thing about our conversations back and forth is that you did exactly that for me, where you were able to say, "Hey, listen, I think that this is a potential gap for you, and like here's how much benefit you get for this amount of dollars in order to address this gap." And it was like the easiest decision in the world to be able to say, "Yes, that is a small amount of money for the benefit that I'm receiving." And I just appreciated how much you brought that to the conversation because I felt like I was really able to make an informed decision at that point
yes.
of around like, yes, you're
Yes.
right. I do need these things. I hadn't thought about them before.
And it's hard because I don't always want to be the guy that scares people, but
We need to be a little scared.
sometimes you need to because these, I guess, if you want to call them newer coverages, the cybers of the world and coverages that are becoming more prevalent, like a
Mm,
flood policy, when these companies deal with these losses that aren't insured, a lot of them don't open their doors again.
they don't.
And so it's a okay, are the chances of your business going through this probably pretty small, but the chances of your business surviving, whether
Even smaller.
if that happens, it's even smaller. So if that does happen, then you're not insured. A lot of these businesses will close their doors. I think it's with flood, it's like 70% of businesses that have a flood, don't reopen. It's like that's scary. Um, and
Let's
where
talk
we're at,
about flood for a second because I know
yeah,
that this is like a big issue, not just with business insurance, but also with homeowners insurance because
yeah,
um, a lot of
it's expensive.
people it's expensive and a lot of people don't realize that like that is a very, very common exclusion to most policies. Am I right?
I'd say every policy just assume that is not covered.
That
There's
flood's
some
not
like
covered.
on every homeowner's policy, it is absolutely excluded. There's some business policies, business owners policies that they'll throw in some flood, depending on where you are. Typically, they'll throw in some flood if you're not in a high flood zone. But
Just to make
uh,
you feel good.
yeah, and the worst part about flood is that it is a coverage for one thing only, and it's
Yeah,
it's flood, it's tidal water, it's any sort of heavy rain. But that's it. That's all you get, and it's usually super expensive because it's not something that a lot of people buy. So that's one of the more detrimental coverages if you don't have it and you have a flood event. Like I said, I think it was something like 70%. I did a
I believe
flood
it.
webinar a couple months ago. And yeah, no, I asked for comments afterwards and they're like, oh, well, you just scared the heck out of me for about a half hour. I'm like, sorry, it is devastating. It's super, super devastating.
I
But
mean, I
that's something
believe that statistic though. Like we had a lot of clients in Vermont over the last couple of years. Vermont has dealt with some astronomical flooding issues in certain
yes.
parts of the state. And we have witnessed firsthand really how devastating it is to these businesses financially. And it's incredibly, incredibly difficult for them to get back up off the ground. Even if they have the opportunity to get like some disaster loans or some SBA funds and things like that, like the cost to like a lot of them sometimes can't go back into the spaces that they were previously in.
Mhm.
They lose a lot of like capital equipment, and then it's sort of like, well, where do I even take these funds and try to restart with? It's not just I'm gonna, wash the floors and reopen tomorrow. Is there
Yeah.
any compelling reason to look at flood insurance if you're not in a high flood zone?
Yes, every county in the U.S. in the last 10 years has seen a flood. whether that's in a super high risk flood zone or not. I think it's something like, let me get it right, but it's something like 50 to 60% of floods happen outside of the high risk flood zones. So it's really like, people see,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. And so to speak on the Vermont floods, it was 300-year flood events in like a couple of months.
In
So
like
it's like,
18 months.
yeah, yeah. So, floods that were only supposed to happen once every 100 years happen three times within a year. You know what I mean?
Oh
So it's,
man,
yeah, no, flooding has happened in every single county in the US in the last, I think, 5 to 10 years.
I did
So,
not know that.
yep. So it has happened literally everywhere in the US, whether you're in a high flood zone, risk flood zone or not. So if that's not compelling enough and it keeps you up at night at any bit, I would take a look. I would take a look at it.
Yeah.
So
What are some of the like objections that you get from business owners? I'm assuming cost is probably the biggest one, but what are some of the objections that you get from business owners in terms of like why they think that they don't need these coverages or why they feel like it's overboard?
it's, I mean, the classic one is it's never happened to me. And
Yep,
that's like it's everybody thinks that, the past is a perfect predictor of the present, which is not.
right.
It really only takes one. I get that a lot, and I get the price. I get the price all the time. It's funny. I'll start to have good conversations with people about coverage, and then you get to the end, and you're like, okay, so if we can get you these coverages, will you go with us? And they say, well, if it's in at a lower price, then yes. So it's hard. It's hard to get people to get away from price, but really, it is such a driver.
Yeah,
It, but it's worth it on our end to drive home the coverage first,
right.
because really in insurance you probably don't want to build your book of business on people that are just price driven, because
Yeah,
the second that your price goes up a little bit more and guy down the street's a little cheaper, he's going to jump. So you really have to kind of, it's more of a massaging of this process, not a,
right.
I'm not going to come in there and say, hey, I'm going to be lower, because they'll listen, but
Sure.
I won't be able to keep that for a long time. So it's really just shifting their thought a little bit about why they buy insurance and why they need to buy insurance.
Yep.
Is Yeah, it's the, I don't think I need that. It never happened in the past. I've never heard of anything like that. It's a, I wouldn't say it's an ego thing, but it's like, oh, not me. That can
Yeah.
stop the business owner. So
100%. And I mean, I don't personally think that I've ever been of that mentality, but and again, I'm not just shooting your horn, but it was like really nice to have a conversation with someone who could honestly assess what I had and what I didn't have, and then make recommendations for what I should have. And I think that that was a lot of what held me back from looking at it. Like, I get it. Like, we're small business owners, we're incredibly busy, we're wearing all these hats, right? So not only am I doing the work all day long, I'm managing my employees, I'm my own marketing team, I'm like my own we have a great IT team, but like there's just a lot of things that like you're doing. And I had really failed to have a great conversation with someone who was able to say, this is what you have, this is what you don't have, and based off of what your business is doing, these are the things that you should really consider. And
mhm.
when you kind of gave me that list of things that I should consider, I'm like reading through going, these are no-brainers. Like, I don't even know why someone has never suggested these to me
Yes.
before, because of course I'm going to end up paying more money than I was, because now all of a sudden I'm getting more policies than I had before. I'm getting more coverage than I had
Mhm.
before. But to me, it was like the cost benefit analysis of this is, I'm looking at it as I could care less if this doubles. I was barely covered for anything before. It was like I was paying half the price, but for nothing almost, little bit
Well,
of
and
coverage, but
the
not a lot.
the yeah, the thing that we find that makes us a little bit different is the sitting down and going through like line by line of
Yeah.
of the policy. It's like if you don't know what you're buying, then you're not going to appreciate what you're buying either. So, and
Yes.
that's a big thing where I sat down with people and they've been with an agent for 10, 15 years. They're like, well, I've never had this conversation. Like I didn't know
Yeah.
that that's a
Right.
thing. It's
Exactly.
because you kind of think, or at least, I put myself in a business owners where it's like, oh, well, they got that taken care of. I have a policy, they
Right.
cover, but they don't know what it covers. And again, if you're in a business that leans, a certain way, maybe like super heavy on employees, like, and you didn't have EPLI, like you should at least know about it. So
Yes.
we go in there and we do a review of the whole policy, and then we sit there and we break down a few points and talk through it and say, hey, do you know about this coverage? One, do you know what it covers? Do you know why you need it? Do you need this? So it's more of a conversation than just like a back and forth, just trying to win business
Yeah.
over money. So
Now, at what point should a business come and have a conversation with you? And what types of things do they ideally want to have ready for that conversation? Like if I'm just meeting with you for the first time, and again, I'm an insurance dummy, so I don't know what I don't know. But like at what point do I need to come have a conversation with you? And what do I bring to the table to make that a really effective meeting?
I don't know. So if that's a good question. Depending on why, if you think that there's any reason why you're not getting the full story on what you're buying, I
Yeah.
think that's a perfect time for. We always say, let us just have a second set of eyes. See if you've had these conversations, which there's a reason why we lead with that, because a lot of people have not had these conversations,
Yeah.
and you need to with your insureds. That's a big one. If you haven't had in-depth conversation about your coverage, and if you're just hearing from them during the renewal, your insurance agent, if you're just hearing from them around the renewal date, what is going on around that renewal date? If they haven't kind of gone through all the coverages with you, and it seems like more of a transactional uh, relationship, then that is something that we try to just be your risk manager, not just a insurance person. We try to be more consultative. You that's what you do. Cultivate Consulting Co. Nice, top left, see it right there. You consult. We're not just insurance brokers. We try to be consultants. Sit down with them, go
Yeah.
through. So if you don't think that you've gone through your policy like that, you can have a second set of eyes, and that could be us, and we can kind of help you look at it in a different way.
Now, does it cost them anything to have you do that second look?
No, so the thing about insurance is we don't get paid until we take over as the broker of record. The other thing is all agents get paid the same. So if you're not with call it a Brown and Brown or a bigger broker that has like more services to offer,
Yeah.
when you jump, it doesn't change, but what you unlock is much different than maybe what your current agent is. Like we have, once you get a little bit into bigger businesses, you unlock more services that again just kind of strengthen your team in risk management. So yeah, if you think that you're not getting if you don't understand your insurance, that's an easy way too. If you don't understand your insurance and you have an insurance agent, then they're not doing the best job for you. They might be nice people. They might be good,
Right.
answering an email. Like, that's table stakes. That's easy. That's the
Sure.
easy part. To get a little bit deeper. That's where we try to just set ourselves apart a little bit. Is just dig a little bit deeper.
Now, kind of a follow-up to this, and I'm going to be like very, very general here, but I guess how often do you see people maybe buying policies from like an industry group, right? Like, so I'm a CPA, I
Yes.
have a national organization that I can get a professional liability policy
Yeah.
from. It's traditionally very inexpensive. How
Yes.
often do you see that, and do you see them having a lot of gaps?
So what you're talking to is what we, sometimes call program business. So
Yeah.
it's a section of the population that has a business that maybe is not served the best in the general insurance market. So for you, you're a CPA, and I looked at you do taxes accounting. I looked at your policy and saw that you were with a specialty program. Those programs, for the most part, are pretty good because they're saying this is all we're insuring.
Yep.
So I set up a policy for a CrossFit gym on one of my first years doing this. and we set up a policy. And then he found out that there's a program that writes insurance for just CrossFit gyms.
Okay.
So what those programs are able to do is cater to one class of business and do it really, really well. So I don't think that there's not a lot of issue. Where you might get some issue is that the flexibility, if those prices do start to get up, like, egregious, you don't
Yeah.
exactly have the flexibility to move around as easy. You would have to then kind of start a relationship with a broker to then do more of a market analysis. But a lot of the times that sort of business or that sort of insurance is catered to exactly what they're doing. And it's typically like we see programs for places like gyms. Not a lot of insurance companies like writing gyms.
Yeah.
Uh,
For
cannabis
obvious
companies,
reasons.
yeah,
Yeah.
for obvious, cannabis companies are
High
are
risk.
are perfect, super high risk. So now there's companies that are coming out with just their cannabis product.
Yep.
To try to cater to their needs, because the insurance market is ever changing and there weren't coverages for those types of businesses. So if you're in a program, I mean, so speak to your policy itself. I couldn't beat the policy that you had with
But
for
I
your
just want to be clear. We're talking, like in
yeah,
my case, we're talking about like a professional liability policy, like
yes,
a liability for the actual business
yes,
operations. But what a lot of the times I think those programs don't include are all the other things that you talked about. Like they're not going
yes,
to include
no,
the employee practices, they're not going
no,
to include cyber. And I think that
no,
that is a gap in business owners' understanding, is they think that because
yes.
they have this one policy that's like, well, it's specific to gym owners. It's like, okay, but it doesn't mean it's going to cover everything that a gym owner
No,
would need.
no. Yeah, you're right. You're right, because we obviously found stuff
Yep,
that policy did really well with your biggest exposure. That's
sure.
probably a better way to put it. Is like
Yeah,
they do great with your overall first kind of big exposure. They'll be able to cover that really well, but outside is where you kind of have to piece it together a little bit.
yeah.
So that's where it might be a little bit different. Where you can just a lot of the time you can do insurance with all one company. So it's a little bit different to navigate, but they do a pretty decent job.
So talk a little bit about that too, because I know that like business, property, like a lot of this is your specialty, but
Yes,
looking at other, like there's a lot of other things that Brown and Brown does. So like I don't
yes,
necessarily, if I'm working with you guys, I don't necessarily have to go someplace else if I now want to have a conversation about health insurance benefits for my
yes.
employees or workers' comp insurance. Like talk a little bit about some of the other
Yeah.
coverages that
So
you guys
yeah,
offer.
so I don't think we even talked about that at first. So I do property and casualty. So that's things like your office and your liabilities, including workers' comp too. So we do workers' comp insurance, but we're a full service international insurance brokerage. So that is anything from your personal insurance, your home,
Yep.
to group health benefits. So employees and employee benefits. We being a national or international firm, we have all these kind of build outs and relationships that, again, if you need it, we can kind of just guide you right there. You don't become a large broker without having all those tools. That's really what
Yeah.
a large broker is like. They can connect all the dots on a level that maybe some of the you know mom and pop insurance shops don't have. So we can connect with any sort of insurance that you can think of. Um,
Nice.
yes, yes,
Convenient.
yes. One
Okay.
stop.
Here's your test question.
Okay, great.
If you could leave business owners with like just one piece of advice when it comes to their insurance, like if there was just one thing that you could say that they would really, really hear, what would it be?
Ooh, that they could really, really hear. It's two parts.
Okay.
Yeah, it's yeah, two parts, and it's more selfishly towards like what I see in terms of processes. Don't market your insurance every year, and don't market it with multiple brokers.
Oh,
It is
why?
not.
Okay.
Yep. Okay,
Explain.
so do not market your insurance every year, and do not market it with multiple brokers. I'll say it one more time, maybe after. So you lose the urgency from underwriters that have not seen your account when every single year they see
Yeah.
that it's going out, and they're not going to jump on that because they know you are going to, and it's
You're gonna
like,
do it
again,
again
it's
next
not
year.
the price. They're just going to lose it next year if someone comes in $1,000 less. So really, another way to kind of that we like to shift the way you think about insurance is that you want to stay with a company for a while and really kind of be a surprise when other underwriters start to see it because they're like, "Ooh, I haven't seen this account. Ooh, this looks like good," and then better positioning yourself to go to that market and get those competitive prices. So
Okay.
really, if you're if you're a business owner that loves bidding and this and that, price, don't do it every year because you're not going to be getting the best prices.
Interesting.
For that. Yep. And then so the second part is don't use multiple brokers. When you use multiple brokers, that's another thing where it's like, you're not building trust with an underwriter by having a bunch of different people working on your account with a bunch of uh, different underwriters and different brokers. It's just it's not as ironclad as saying, okay, here, oh, this is a submission from Brown and Brown, like, and that's all we're going to see. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you align yourself, insurance more now is who is your broker, who have you aligned yourself with, not how many people do you have looking for you. It's not a typical. I heard you say vendor, and we don't like to be seen as a vendor because in insurance, only one person can go to the insurance companies and get pricing.
Right.
So you control the process better if you have one broker that's doing it.
That's good advice.
So,
I didn't know
yep.
that.
Don't market your insurance every year and don't have multiple brokers doing it. It causes it you're not getting the best price, or it's not just the best way to position yourself in the marketplace.
I bet a lot
So,
of people didn't know that. That's a good piece of advice. Um,
yes.
how do people get a hold of you, Connor? So if somebody is interested in chatting with you, getting a second
Yes.
look, having a conversation with you, how do people
Mhm.
best get a hold of you?
Just through you. They just come to you and then they can get to me. No. My cell phone number, I'll give that out, 207-632-7576. But I have my email as well as my first name, Connor dot Rague, Rague at bbrown.com. Maybe you'll put that in the chat
I
or something.
will. I will put it up with this recording. Um,
Yes.
this has been amazing. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Incredibly
you.
informative. This is one of those areas that it's like I am able and willing to say that I am very, very far from an expert, and I'm grateful that there are people like you that exist that can break this down for me in like small details of like what it is that I need to understand. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Yes, of course. And I'll push it right back to you where thank you for being a great client and
We
super
try.
just want to learn. I want more clients like you. So if you know more people that are like Christine, send them my way then.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Connor. You guys will get this up on YouTube. Enjoy, and you'll have Connor's contact information if you want to reach out to him.
Thanks, Christine.